So you have to gauge your own kids. I think it's a different, listen, I went to UCLA, I went to Harvard Law. There are no two more liberal institutions, leftists. I don't like the word liberal, they're not liberals, they're leftists. There are no two more leftist institutions on the planet than UCLA and Harvard Law School. I came out a stronger conservative because I used everything that I was learning as a starter. It wasn't the end point, right? It was, okay, you want me to read John Rawls? Okay, well now I'm going to go and I'm going to read Frederick Hayek, right? I'm going to read various perspectives on the same issue so that I know how to counter the argument. So I can argue leftist positions better than most leftists can, right? So, so if you have somebody who's a solid conservative, what I say to parents is about college, if your kid is not a solid conservative, if your kid doesn't have solid values by the time they're 18, they'll be a leftist by the time they're 21. That's the way that this works. All your heavy lifting is done before the college years. So you sort of have to, I mean, honestly, I think that if your kid isn't solidly ensconced in values before they hit puberty, you're in trouble. So this is a long as someone with a 2-year-old daughter and a son on the way. I mean, this is something I'm going to have to work on. It's something that, you know, I think that you have to gauge this. So what I say to college students who are really politically motivated is go to leftist campuses. Go to leftist campuses, learn how to hone your arguments, become a weapon. And what I also tell them is if you're going to be on a leftist campus, don't be stupid. If the professor is going to grade you down for being conservative in class, write like a communist. I mean, this is actually what I did when I was at UCLA. I'd argue with the professor in class, and then we had things called blue books, and blue books were great because they were anonymous. They just used your student ID number. And so if you read my actual essays from college, they read like something directly out of The Nation. And if you know, and obviously that's not what I think, but that's how you get to graduate summa cum laude at UCLA, go to Harvard Law School, and then use all their degrees against them. So.
So I've seen a lot of your videos, and I just had a couple of quick questions about education. So let's just start out. And where do you stand on it? Where would you like to see it in 50 or 100 years?
Well, I think that education needs to get back to a perspective where we are training people for actual activities rather than training people for whining outside this lecture hall. Training for any job is actually just being on the job. And there's this weird idea that you can do job training in college. You can get a basic skill set that may be applicable to a job, but the best way to do a job is just to get a job. So I'm very much in line with Peter Thiel's argument that there's a good argument that you should probably, like, if you don't actually have a plan for what you're doing with your education, and you're just going to college in order to go to your gender studies course and then have no job afterward, then you might be better off taking that money and pouring it into something more productive.
So, like, what steps would you personally like to see implemented into not just college, but high school and
so I'll start with college, and I'm going to say something deeply unpopular. I do not think the government should be in the business of student loans. The reason I say this is because the government is not answerable to anybody. It's just a giant money bag, and they have an interest in providing student loans to anyone who will take it because now you're dependent on the government and you like the government. When it comes to private loans, I'll give you an example. When it comes to my wife's medical school education, we took out a bunch of private loans. Or we didn't have to, but we could have. If we had done that, we would have gotten loans up the wazoo. She's going to be a doctor. She'll pay it back. Better example is Harvard Law. I had big loans from private institutions for Harvard Law. Did I have trouble getting a loan? Of course not. They knew that I'd be making 6 figures coming out of Harvard Law. Now, if I wanted to major in lesbian dance theory, would I have been able to get an actual loan from an actual bank? No, because the loan officer would look at me and say, how in the world are we going to pay this off? I mean, we can't repossess your lesbian dance theory degree. So what exactly do we do here? So privatizing student loans would do a lot to actually inject a measure of rationality and forward thinking into college. As far as high school and elementary school, we need to go back to a standards-based curriculum, and we need to go back to localism, because the people who care most about their kids' education are still the parents. This notion... There's this idea that if we just pour money into schools, and suddenly that's going to fix all the public schools, it'll fix elementary, it'll fix middle, it'll fix high school. The fact is that good schools start with parents who care enough about their children's education to get involved and make sure that their kids are getting a good education. So I am for things like vouchers, and I am for freedom and educational choice, and I am for localism, but it all starts at home. And I think that if you really want to fix the educational system, you have to start with the idea that the schools are not responsible for your kids' education in the main. You are responsible for your kids' education in the main.
My question, though, is that for a long, long time, the Democrats or left-wingers, perhaps better said, have been aiming at taking over education. And they've taken over. It's not just the university campuses, it's the high school campuses, it's the grammar schools. What kind of a long-range plan would you suggest or throw out some ideas on how we could go about taking back the educational system?
So I think that obviously the first step is to maintain local control of the education system. And the biggest problem is that as you federalize it, it tends to get more lefty. The second step you could do would be to get rid of public sector teachers unions, because all of them tend to be left, and the reason they tend to be left is because then they can unionize against the government, which means against the taxpayer, so they're in favor of bigger government just so that they can get paid more. It's what the public sector unions do. So you get rid of public sector teachers unions as they did in Wisconsin. That'd be a good step. And honestly, my biggest answer is give people vouchers and make it more affordable for people to get out of the public school system entirely, because a lot of the public school system, particularly in California, sucks. I mean, I went to LAUSD. LAUSD is the worst public school district in the country. It's enormous, and it's bloated, and it should be 4 or 5 separate school districts. But because it's one city, they've made it one giant school district, and it's administered by a bunch of leftists administrators. So I think that's the easiest solution. But that requires particularly religious people to get very active and say, I'm not going to. It may be cheaper for me to send my kid to public school, but I'm not going to because of the values involved. And I think that as you do that, as you get more competition in the marketplace for lower parochial schools, then the price drops and you get more people in those schools, which would be a tremendous thing. It'd be a tremendous thing. I'm not a fan of our public education system, and I think that it's great that you have it as long as it's locally controlled and not federally controlled or even state controlled. It should be really, really locally controlled. But if you can't have that, then you should have a private school that people can go to. And I think it's a really worthwhile endeavor. If you have a lot of rich people in this room, it's a worthwhile endeavor to try and sponsor scholarships, particularly for example, inner city students to stop going to local public schools, which really are terrible and indoctrinate people in leftism, and to instead...
You address the differences in, like, for instance, the educational system between inner city schools, which usually have worse infrastructure, many times have lack qualified teachers or lack teachers, period, versus schools in affluent neighborhoods. How do you try to get justice to the students living in inner cities versus those living in affluent neighborhoods?
Right. So I mean, the answer to me is more individual freedom, not less. One of the great problems is that people think government action is what rectifies these situations. It doesn't matter how much money you dump into inner city public schools if, number one, you don't have any sort of community or family structure that supports education. And this isn't just true of black communities. It's true. There's J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. It's a really worthwhile book. You should read it. It's all about a kind of downtrodden white communities in Ohio, and they have some similar problems to a lot of inner city black communities. The solution here is twofold. One, give parents more choice in where they send their kids to school, and two, a reversion to an actual belief in parental responsibility, because the truth is that the idea that kids are failing in the inner city because they just have bad teachers isn't true. I mean, if you've ever met the teachers in the inner city, some of them are wonderful. And some of them, they're really doing the best they can, I think. I think the bigger problem that you have is when you have broken families and you have people who are not inculcating the value of education, and when you have people who are saying to young people, and this is true all over the country regardless of race, this is one of my problems with this election, is I think all of the candidates in their own way are basically saying, you're a victim of the society, so individual responsibility no longer devolves to you. If you actually have parents saying to their own kids, okay, I expect you to do well. I expect you to get an education. It's not a suggestion, it's an expectation that you're going to work hard. Then there really is, that's the only way that this is ever going to get solved. Parents are I have my own kids, I'm the one, in the end, even if there are no, I'm not going to send my kid to public school. I'm going to send my kid to private schools because the public schools in my area are a failure. LAUSD spends about $10,000 per student per year, and it's the worst school district in America. I'm going to send my kids to private school, but even if there were no private schools available, my job is educating my kids, just like my job is feeding my kids. My job is to take care of my kids. If I do nothing else in my life, taking care of my kids is my sole responsibility, and people who fail to recognize this You want to talk about what's the number one problem in America? That's the number one problem in America, is people running away from their responsibility to their kids and to their family members and to their parents. If we all took care of our kids and our family members and our parents, there wouldn't be any need for the government to come in and screw everything up royally like it does.